Let me start by saying this. If you're training consistently, putting in effort, and still not seeing the results you expect, there's a very good chance the issue isn't your work ethic, it's your structure. Most people are doing enough work, they're just doing the wrong kind of work for the goal they wish to achieve. So in this video, I want to slow everything down and really walk you through how to structure your workouts based on your goal and how to approach your exercises in a way that actually produces results. So let's get into it. Before we talk about exercises, reps, or training splits, we need to get one thing straight. Your goal isn't just something you say, it's the filter that everything else should pass through. If your goal is muscle growth, your training needs to prioritize tension, progression, and recovery. If your goal is fat loss, your training needs to preserve muscle while supporting a calorie deficit. If your goal is recomp, your training needs to balance stimulus and recovery very carefully. Where people get stuck is trying to train for everything at once without adjusting how they train. They'll say they want muscle, but train like endurance athletes, or say they want fat loss, but train like they're bulking. So before we get more specific, understand this. If your goal isn't clear, your training decisions won't be either. Once your goal is defined, everything else becomes much easier to structure. One of the biggest mistakes people make is equating effort with effectiveness. If the workout feels brutal, they assume it worked. If they're dripping in sweat or sore for days, they assume they made progress. But effort without direction doesn't guarantee results. You can absolutely train hard and still miss the stimulus you're aiming for. You can feel exhausted and still not create enough tension to grow muscle. And you can burn calories without preserving the muscle you're trying to keep. Effective training means applying the right kind of stress, not just more stress. Once you stop using fatigue as your scoreboard and start judging workouts by how well they match your goal, your training quality goes up immediately. That's where real progress starts. Execution matters more than exercise variety. A lot of people think progress comes from constantly changing exercises, new movements, new machines, new routines every few weeks. But progress actually comes from doing a smaller number of movements really well, consistently over time. Execution determines how much tension the muscle experiences, how repeatable the movement is week to week, how easy it is to track progression. You can grow muscle with very basic exercises if execution is solid, and you can stall for years doing advanced movements with poor control. Once you prioritize execution over novelty, you stop chasing new exercises and start building momentum, and that momentum is what allows structure to actually work. Compound lifts are the backbone of your program. Squats, presses, rows, hinges, movements that involve multiple joints and large amounts of muscle mass. These lifts are powerful because they allow you to use heavier loads, progress over time, create a large overall stimulus. But that power comes at a cost. Compound lifts also create more fatigue, more joint stress, and more recovery demand than isolation exercises. That's why how you approach them matters so much. Because compounds do so much work, they need structure and discipline. Treating them casually or aggressively at the wrong time is where a lot of people run into problems. How hard you should actually push compound lifts. Here's a rule that will save you years of frustration. On compound lifts, you should almost never be training to absolute failure. Most of your working sets should end with 1 to 3 reps in reserve. That means the set is challenging, but you could still perform another clean rep or 2 if you had to. This approach keeps technique consistent, recovery manageable, performance trending upward, and risk of injury low. When people take compounds to failure regularly, form breaks down, recovery tanks, risk of injury skyrockets, and progress becomes inconsistent. Leaving a small amount in the tank isn't holding back. It's what allows you to come back next session and actually improve. This is how compounds support long-term progress instead of sabotaging it. Now let's talk about reps, because this is where people either overcomplicate things or completely miss the point. For most compound lifts, your most productive rep range is going to live between 6 and 10 reps. This range is heavy enough to create real mechanical tension, which is what muscle responds to, but it's also light enough that you can actually control the weight and repeat the movement week after week. Where people mess this up is chasing numbers instead of quality. They load the bar so heavy that every rep turns into a grind, or their technique changes just to survive the set. That's not productive strength. That's just surviving the weight. When compounds are performed in the 6 to 10 rep range with control and consistency, you get the stimulus you want without accumulating unnecessary fatigue. That balance is what keeps progress moving forward. Why compounds to failure usually do more harm than good. Let's clear something up. Training to failure feels productive, especially on big lifts, but most of the time it creates more problems than progress. When you push compounds to failure, technique breaks down, recovery demands spike, performance in future sessions drops. And that matters because muscle and strength are built over time, not in one heroic set. If one max effort set causes the next 3 workouts to suffer, that's not a win. Compounds reward discipline and consistency. Leaving a rep or 2 in reserve allows you to stack good sessions together, and that's where real progress comes from. Now let's shift gears and talk about isolation exercises. Things like curls, lateral raises, leg extensions, hamstring curls, flies. These movements exist to target a muscle directly without the same systemic fatigue that compounds create. They're more stable, they involve fewer joints, and they're much easier to recover from, which changes how aggressively we can train them. Once you understand that isolation exercises have a different cost than compounds, it becomes clear why they should be approached differently instead of trained the exact same way. How hard you should push isolation exercises. This is where a lot of people either hold back too much or go completely sloppy. On isolation exercises, you can take sets to failure, and often you should. But failure has to be honest. That means the target muscle can't produce another rep with good form, not that you start swinging the weight or shortening the range of motion. Momentum is not intensity. Isolation work is where you earn deep muscle fatigue without wrecking recovery. When done correctly, it complements your compound work instead of interfering with it. For isolation exercises, the sweet spot is typically 6 to 12 reps. This range allows you to keep tension on the muscle, maintain control, accumulate meaningful fatigue. Sometimes higher reps work well too, especially for smaller muscle groups, as long as tension stays where it should. What matters more than the number is control. If the muscle stays loaded from start to finish, the reps count. Isolation work isn't about chasing weight, it's about chasing tension. When you keep that in mind, rep ranges become a tool instead of a distraction. The order you perform exercises in a session makes a big difference. Compound lifts should almost always come first. They require the most focus, the most strength, and the most coordination. Isolation exercises tolerate fatigue much better, which makes them ideal for later in the workout. If you reverse this order, your performance on the most important lifts suffers. Good structure means putting your best energy into the exercises that demand it most. That's how you get more out of the same amount of training time. What a properly structured workout actually looks like. A well-structured workout isn't complicated. You start with a main compound lift, something you're focused on progressing. Then you move to a secondary compound or accessory that supports that main lift. After that, you finish with isolation work to fully fatigue specific muscles. Every exercise has a purpose. Every set has intent. When workouts are structured this way, training stops feeling chaotic and starts feeling repeatable, and repeatability is what drives results. How this structure changes when muscle growth is the goal. If your primary goal is muscle growth, volume increases slightly. You're still keeping compounds 1 to 3 reps shy of failure. You're still pushing isolations to failure. But you're paying close attention to progression. More reps, more weight, better execution over time. Growth happens when stress increases gradually, not all at once. Muscle growth rewards patience. When structure supports progression instead of exhaustion, gains become predictable instead of random. How this structure changes for fat loss. When fat loss is the goal, strength training becomes protective. You're not using weights to burn calories. That's the job of nutrition and cardio. You keep compounds heavy to signal muscle retention. You manage volume so recovery doesn't fall apart. You avoid turning lifting into conditioning. Proper fat loss training helps you look better at the end of a diet, not just lighter. That only happens when muscle is protected. How this structure changes for recomposition. Recomposition is where precision matters most. Volume needs to be moderate. Execution needs to be high quality. Every set needs to earn its place. You don't have room for junk volume or sloppy reps here. Training hard is important, but training recoverable is essential. Recomp works best when you do fewer things extremely well instead of trying to do everything at once. Rest periods are part of the program. Rest isn't wasted time, it's part of the stimulus. For compounds, most people need 2 to 3 minutes to perform the next set well. For isolation exercises, 1 to 2 minutes is usually enough. If rest is rushed, performance drops, and when performance drops, stimulus drops with it. Rest supports quality. If you want better reps, better sets, and better progress, you need to give your body enough time between sets and exercises. Tracking is what makes progress obvious. You don't need a complicated system, but you do need feedback. Weights, reps, or both. If you're not tracking something, you're guessing, and guessing makes it impossible to know whether your structure is actually working. Tracking turns effort into information, and once you have information, you can actually make intelligent adjustments instead of random changes. The most common mistakes that undermine good training. Most people don't fail because their plan is bad. They fail because of habits. Ego lifting, chasing soreness, changing exercises too often, ignoring recovery signals. Even the best structure won't work if it's not respected. Consistency with solid fundamentals will outperform perfect plans that are never followed. Structure only works when you commit to it. So if you want better results, your workouts don't need to be more complicated. They need to be more intentional. Train compounds with discipline, push isolations with purpose, and always match your training to your goal. If this helped, comment your goal below, like the video, and subscribe. This is Rocket Man, signing out.